All right, so it is a new day for me, and just a quick tidbit. I am feeling a little better than yesterday, at least so far today. All right, so we are moving forward in the tribal religions workbook, and we're to a point on looking at oral culture versus written culture. Primal culture specifically, and even archaic to a lesser degree. Primal cultures did not yet have adequate literacy rates to precisely record their stories. There was still art, such as what you will see with the Gagaju, and occasionally there were different markings, but there wasn't a written language. During the archaic period, writing and literacy does grow, but it's usually for the upper class or it is specific to a particular job. However, even though literacy is growing, orality remained a very important part of storytelling, teaching morality, as well as creating a tradition of understanding the written stories. This actually shows up in Judaism with the oral tradition. Today, there are still tribal groups that are orally based and do not have their religious beliefs and practices written down, or at least not completely written down. Some tribes, even with a written language, still primarily use oral stories and storytelling as the way to teach their youth, as the way to pass on traditions. Okay, so I will let you go ahead and read this little bit. Now, this task, uh, I miss doing it on campus as a group activity. And it's not a group discussion for this section. One reason I miss that is because we would get into groups and be able to share multiple ideas about benefits and problems and discuss more in depth this difference between how things happen when you have an oral culture and how things happen when you have a written culture as far as community. So, does the community benefit when there are oral traditions? Does it have problems? Are there problems that happen when it's only an oral? What about if it's written? What can happen with the community? And what problems might occur? All right. We want to think about, engagement, the senses, the ability to remember things. Does oral culture help us with our memory, or are there problems? Does written culture help us with our memory, or are there problems? And then change or lack of change. In this sense, we can use either one, and we can say, well, is there a benefit to orality in regards to the fact it can change? Or is that a problem? With written culture, is there a benefit to the fact that there's not a lot of change? Or is that a problem? So we're thinking about adaptability, interpretations, meanings, and how that will change. Okay, so in this task, you're looking to add information about a problem. Now, this problem needs to be related to community and related to oral culture. I'm going to give you an example, and you can use it, and I won't mark off if you use this example, but I would like you to think a little deeper. All right, so a benefit that's listed here. Because of the requirement to be physically present, it improves the bonds of community. One example I'd like to give is if there is a recipe that your grandma, your aunt, your uncle, somebody in your family, your mom knows, and it's not written down because, well, it just isn't. And the thing is, if you're not around to hear the recipe, to have grandma or aunt or uncle or whoever it is, and maybe it's making barbecue, and it's, well, you need to baste it every so often, and all these different little tidbits that actually help you make that perfect barbecue that your family was known for. And the problem is, if you're not there, you don't get to know it. The benefit of oral culture is that by requiring you to be there, think about what happens when you're physically there. Not only are you learning the recipe, you're also getting to talk to the family that's there, friends that are there. You get to meet cousin so-and-so, or you get to improve your relationships with your mom or your dad or your sister, or with somebody, because you're physically there. And when we're physically next to each other, it absolutely is going to help community. It brings us together. It strengthens the bonds. If you're not there, you don't get to learn it. And if you don't get to learn it, it's hard to be part of the community. This extends itself. So like I said, I'm giving you a little bit of an example, but I want you to go a little further with it. You might think about the Gagaju. What happens when not just Jonathan Yaramara goes off to get an education, but when all the kids go off? What happens to the community? All right, so maybe written culture is better. We've had a pandemic. We haven't been able to meet in person. What has that done to community in a positive or a negative way? So, because we are not required, or maybe we're not capable of being near each other, the strength of the community can decline. Keyword is can. Doesn't mean it always will. We know that there are many communities that have come out of the pandemic much stronger. But when we're not physically engaged with each other, it's different. The community isn't as closely bonded most of the time. So, what's a benefit? How might having all of your things, your writings, all your stories written down or online on the website, how can that benefit community? All right. Alive, memory, our senses, our ability to remember something, our ability to connect with something, especially like if we're a kinesthetic learner. So oral culture, especially if we are not physically present to regularly be reminded, the stories may change or be lost. That's an example. The stories are lost because we're not there to hear them. But let's focus real quick on the sense of being alive. When you are listening to a good story, hearing a good story, listening to a great TikTok, we get expressions. And sometimes we can get lost in the excitement of something that we don't actually hear the story. The story's kind of lost to all the excitement and all the things that are happening. There's too much going on. You are physically there, ready for the story, but there's a fire going on, and there are people beating a drum, and people dancing, and all these different things, and it's so stimulating that you miss things. But how can that be a benefit? Now I'm going to go ahead and bring in, again, one example. You can use it, but I want you to think of your own as well. When we're looking at oral cultures, when we're looking at storytelling, can anyone, I missed teaching. All right. Can anyone think about why stories are told to a rhythm? whether it's rhyming or whether it's the fact you are singing it, whether or not it's the idea of there being a drum beat. You're hearing, what is it about a drum beat that you can get into a story? You can hear it. You start to connect with this rhythm. Why is it when we're children, we have all these different mnemonic devices we use, or songs that we use? How is it that they're helping the memory? They're coming alive. It happens where, and this is a different sensation. It's fall. Pumpkin spice is everywhere. It's everywhere. And all of a sudden, there's something, it's a pumpkin spice, but it's different. All of a sudden you are whisked back to being a kid, and there's a pumpkin pie or pumpkin latte. There's something. And this current smell is that exact combination of spices. Or, just to go back to that family barbecue, you're at a cousin's house and all of a sudden, they're making barbecue and you're like, whatever, it's barbecue. But then you realize it is the barbecue, that specific one. And the thing is, you don't just remember the barbecue. You don't just remember that pumpkin spice. All of a sudden, the story comes back. Because when it was presented to you, it was alive. It engaged the senses. So what about written culture? I mean, you don't really smell book. Well, maybe sometimes, if it's an old book and there's leather. Okay, dropping that for a moment. We don't have that sense of aliveness with written culture. But because we can now access the text and the knowledge from any single place, so a faulty memory, questions of what something did or didn't say, that's a benefit. We can figure it out. You're not sure what a certain quote was? Hey, look it up online. It's there. There may be numerous forms of it, and you might not know which one was right. And the fact is, if the internet goes down, you just don't remember it. Come up with your own problems. But think about written culture. I know this video is getting a little bit longer. That's okay. We're on the last one. So change or lack of change. Now, oral culture, obviously it's easy to change things. There's a reason why James Mooney wrote down multiple versions of some of the stories, because he heard multiple versions. Which version was the original? Well, I don't know. That could be a problem. I want you to think of your own problems, or your own reasons that oral culture could be a problem with its ease of change. But the benefit of it is that we can adapt it. There is a story that you guys are no longer required to read because we don't have the book anymore. But it's the story of Jumping Mouse. And so Jumping Mouse is this little mouse that lived in the field, and it was kind of different than its other fellow mice, and it liked to jump up, and it saw this thing in the distance, mountain, but it didn't know it was mountain, and all the other mice thought he was crazy, but he went off to try and find it, and he meets all these other animals, like a frog and an elephant, a buffalo, and all these different creatures. So there's a couple variations of it, but it's generally the same story. But the thing is, how you tell that story can emphasize different lessons. So if you're telling it to your kid, and your kid is just really shy around people who are different than him or her, or they, you can tell the story and emphasize how Jumping Mouse made friends with the frog and made friends with the buffalo and, got to meet all these unique and different people. But maybe your kid is great at making friends. No problem there. However, they don't like to take risks. They're kind of they're lacking a little bit of courage. So now the story of Jumping Mouse can emphasize that Jumping Mouse was willing to try, willing to risk any number of different things in each step of the story. Oral culture allows us to change that. If you were listening back during the videos for section 1, I was talking about, Mount Rainier and the tribe moves to, the Florida Keys. Well, oral culture says, hey, we can update the story. We can update the rituals to fit the situation we're in, to fit this new geographical climate. So I went on a little bit about the benefits. I want you to think about the problems of that ease of change. So let's go over to written culture. For written culture, I also want you to decide what the problems and challenges are, because we have a lack of change. Now, that lack of change allows for better preservation of the materials and less questioning. Gagaju boy is sitting there and saying, no, if somebody messes up the ritual, they turn into a gator. And the other kid's like, no, they don't. And they're fighting. Well, guess what? They can go to their sacred story. They can open it up, find the page, and say, nope. The book tells us if we mess up the ritual, we turn into a frilled lizard to be laughed at forevermore. We can go to the material, because maybe the person who told the original story died, or passed away, or is just not here with us. Community kind of faded away, and we have the story, or multiple versions of the story. Well, here in written culture, we can go to the source. But what could be a problem? I will give a little example of one possible problem. The boy's like, wait a minute. It says if we mess up the ritual, we'll turn into a frilled lizard. Runs over to mom, dad, somebody, the elder, looks at him. The book tells me that if I mess up the ritual, I'm going to be turned into a frilled lizard. And you've said we're supposed to believe everything that's in this book. Well, excuse me, but I just saw Sally down there, and she's messed up the ritual, and she's messed up multiple rituals, and even my mom has messed up a ritual before, and none of them have turned into frilled lizards. So I don't know what I'm supposed to believe in this book. It just, I'm tired of it. I don't understand. And so we have that type of a problem that might show up. But there are others. And even in that, what is the actual problem? All right, so that is task 1 and oral and written culture.